Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Markets and Morality, an IA show where free market liberals are discussing two different perspectives on topical issues. My name is Adam Bartha, and I'm the director of Ep.10, which is a network of free market classical liberal think tanks from all across Europe. And just like me, you might be wondering nowadays why every time you go to your grocery shopping or go out for a meal in a restaurant or take an Uber ride, why is everything becoming so expensive? And this is not only true here in the United Kingdom, but also in much of Europe and much of the Americas. So high inflation and low interest rates are a pretty bad mix for people who want to save. And that's why a lot of individuals started looking at cryptocurrencies. And a lot of these cryptocurrencies are reaching an all-time high nowadays. If you look at the price of Bitcoin or the price of Ethereum, they have been at all-time highs in November. And people are expecting kind of regulatory changes when it comes to cryptocurrencies, both in Europe and in the United States. So the question arises for a lot of free marketeers whether cryptocurrencies should become legal tender, either in the United Kingdom or in the European Union. And to share two different perspectives with you, I'm delighted to welcome two top-notch analysts who have been regularly commenting on economic and technological affairs, both in the UK and on the continent. And although they have two different perspectives and two different answers to the question, both of them are united in their approach, namely that they come from a free market liberal background and they want to solve societal problems through market mechanisms whilst respecting the cornerstones of a free society. So I'm very happy to welcome Julian Jessop to our discussion. Julian is an independent economist with over 30 years of experience gained in the public and private sector. He has been working in the city and for various consultancies, and he had a couple of stints at the Treasury, at HSBC, and at Standard Chartered Bank and Capital Economics as well. And Julian was also the chief economist of the IEA until 2018. And he continues to support our work, especially on the schools and university outreach as an economics fellow at the moment. I'm also delighted to welcome Julio Alexander, who is joining us as an e-governance consultant who is specializing in decentralized technologies and in non-state electric solutions for complex global problems. Julio is the CEO and the founder of Jada Consulting, based in London, and also the CEO and founder of Humanitarian Blockchain, which was the world's most successful blockchain NGO in 2016. Gentlemen, it's fantastic to have both of you with us. Thanks a lot for joining. Julio, I would like to turn to you first, because whilst our question might be rather hypothetical in a European context, there is already one country that implemented cryptocurrencies as their legal tender. I'm sure you know that El Salvador passed the Bitcoin law during the summer of 2021, which effectively made Bitcoin their national currency. Is this the way to go for other governments across the globe, or is Salvador some sort of a special case for some reason?
The answer is yes. Governments, individuals, private and public, every kind of institution, organization, NGO, organizations should adopt at the highest speed one technology called cryptocurrency. That technology is neutral, has no morality. People can use it for a positive, free market, liberty, increasing freedoms of society and idea, or it can be used, the same neutral technology can be used for very evil surveillance and the surveillance purposes. So the question is, how do we use that neutral technology in a positive way? For this, we need to understand who were the people that created this technology and how this created is at the moment. Whereas it is necessary for us to understand that this was created within the 1970s. In 1976, Friedrich Hayek, Austrian economist, wrote a book called Denationalization of Money. And in 1973, David Friedman built The Machinery of Freedom. These two cornerstones provided a group called the cypherpunks in the 1980s and 90s for the creation of the first and early cryptocurrencies. The cypherpunks, people like Eric Huge, Tim May, John Gilmore, Julian Assange, and possibly Satoshi Nakamoto, decided to create these ideologies in a set of manifestos that are called, or that talk about, decentralization, privacy, open source, and free markets. And therefore, the question that I would ask and that I would continue is not if it is good or bad, but if it is good for whom. And if we believe this process, or that every individual should have the choice to create their own multiple technological systems and choose their own system for governance, then cryptocurrencies like Monero, Zcash, Bibix are the way.
And is adopting these cryptocurrencies as legal tender a beneficial or rather problematic thing from your perspective?
It is totally beneficial. Why? Because within this ideology, the government of Salvador announced about 3-4 days ago that they're creating one of the first blockchain cities. This is an innovation zone. It has multiple names, it has different ideas, but at the end of the day, it's a startup society, a society or an intentional community that is built within a specific purpose and that would use all of the blockchain protocols. In the economic sense, cryptocurrencies. In the legal sense, smart contracts. In the governance, the human positive incentive to govern ourselves, the centralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. And in the city, visa, and territorial way, they're using the concept called blockchain cities. Whenever we understand that these ideas have already been debated, constructed within the anarcho-capitalist society of the United States in the 1970s, that it derives from the UK, the Austrian, the Jewish diaspora, from what he calls classical liberalism, the Austrian, the Chicago School of Economics, we understand that the idea is to denationalize, demonopolize everything. And in that sense, governments taking the first step to educate their citizens in the economic sense will be beneficial for everyone.
Julian, are you equally optimistic when it comes to adopting cryptocurrencies as legal tender as Julio is, or is there a possible downside of that?
Well, I'm far more skeptical. I'll start with a couple of positives, though. First of all, I'm all in favour of competition, including competition in currencies. So if private sector organisations or individuals want to set up their own currencies and persuade others to use them, then that's great. I also agree that the key reason why we're seeing global inflation pick up as much as we've done over the last year or so is simply too much cheap money chasing too few goods and services. So the fact that we basically use fiat currencies that can be created at will by governments and central banks has contributed to the inflation problem. So there may well be some sort of role for cryptocurrencies whose supply is finite in keeping central banks and governments under control in that respect. However, and you knew there was a however coming, I'm still skeptical about the idea of making cryptocurrencies legal tender in countries like the UK. For a start, these currencies are not yet fully developed. If you make something legal tender, then arguably you're impinging on the freedom of individuals to decide which currencies to accept in payment of a debt. So at the moment, legal tender in the UK is the pound sterling, and everybody has to accept that. But if you force them to accept Bitcoin as well, you're potentially forcing them to accept a currency whose value is highly volatile still, subject to all sorts of regulatory risks and reputational risks. I think that would be a step too far. I'd also be concerned about the risk to the taxpayer, because of course if a currency is legal tender, then you're able to use it to pay a debt to the government. So if people start paying their tax bills and other bills to the government in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin subsequently collapses in value, as it may well do, then you're exposing other taxpayers to huge risks. I am keen on the wider use of the blockchain technology that lies behind Bitcoin as a means to support payment systems, and maybe that's the best way of looking at what's happening in El Salvador. It becomes a more efficient payment system that people can use than whatever the national central bank and regulators were able to come up with. But in the UK, we can use that technology without necessarily adopting Bitcoin as a national currency. So the private sector could develop the use of Bitcoin technology as it is. or the government and the central bank can set up central bank digital currencies that serve a similar purpose. So I'm all in favour, as I say, of competition and markets and so on, but I think it's far too soon to talk about adopting Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies as legal tender in the UK or anywhere else in the developed world.
Sure. And from a savings perspective, I mean, you have mentioned inflation and the supply of money increasing steadily, both in the UK and across the EU. And there is a lot of discussion reasonably about this issue and how long inflation is going to remain reasonably high in developed economies. From that perspective, do you think that cryptocurrencies are a beneficial saving asset, or because of the volatility, it's still a very, very risky business to enter in? And from putting your economist hat on, if you had to give some financial advice to young savers who are worried about inflation, would you actually consider cryptocurrencies as valuable advice?
Okay, well, I mean, two points there. First of all, adopting cryptocurrencies, your legal tender, doesn't solve the problem of central banks and governments printing more money if they want to. Unless cryptocurrencies become the only legal tender, then governments can always print more money and inflate the money supply and pay off their debts in the short term, at least in that way. So cryptocurrency doesn't solve the fiat currency problem unless it replaces them. The second point, I mean, I do actually, as it happens, sit on a number of investment committees providing, economic analysis and input, and we're often asked, should you invest in crypto? I've got a number of problems here. First of all, as an economist, I have no real handle on what cryptocurrencies are worth, because they are, private assets that don't pay any income with only a short track record. It's very hard to say objectively whether Bitcoin is worth $10,000 or $100,000 or a lot more. It also has various sort of reputational and regulatory risks associated with it. The regulatory risk is that you might end up in an asset that the regulators decide to shut down, and you lose a significant portion of your money. Reputational risks as well. At the moment, at least, Bitcoin isn't particularly environmentally friendly because of all the energy required to mine new Bitcoin. That might change in future. There might be a green Bitcoin, but at the moment, it's hard to fit it into an ESG portfolio. If you are looking for inflation hedges, there are other inflation hedges out there that have a better track record. Whether that's gold or inflation index linked government securities. So I wouldn't really recommend Bitcoin as an inflation hedge. And sorry, the final point here is that I tend not to think of Bitcoin anyway as a currency. I think of it more as an asset. I don't think people hold Bitcoin in order to use it as a means of exchange to pay bills and so on, because almost hardly anybody accepts it. It's more something that people take a speculative punt on, which again makes me very nervous of recommending it as a form of legal tender, when at the moment it's still largely a speculative asset.
You're right. It's quite true that most people don't use Bitcoin as a currency. Although I do have a friend who spent 2 Bitcoins, I believe, 10 years ago on one pizza. I think he's pretty unhappy about that expenditure at the moment. But Julio, I would like to turn to you a bit. You might have been following Christine Lagarde's announcement in the autumn, namely the fact that the European Central Bank is doing a public consultation and looking into establishing a digital euro. Basically, their reasoning is that there is consumer demand for a digital euro, and they're citing the popularity of cryptocurrencies to justify that. Some analysts are actually worried what a digital euro would mean in practice, because it would be easier to increase the supply of money. It would be easier to get data on the spending habits of citizens. So what is your attitude to digital currencies created by the state or state-linked entities? Are you optimistic that this is the right direction? Or do you think that it has some privacy dangers, and does it mean that a cashless society would actually end up in a lot more government control?
I would change the framework. because there is no contradiction in allowing governments from the world, including very tyrannical, worthless, and bad organizations like the European Central Bank, the British Bank, the Bank of England, or any national bank, to create their own currencies, as long, if and only if the individuals, the consumers, have the choice to use whatever kind of currency that they want. An important factor of this is called market governance. One thing that is inextricable from each other is that every single coin that is created at the moment, or most of the futuristic advances, systems of technology entrepreneurship, are linked within a physical geography, within a city itself. This aims to replace, through privatization, most and market competition, most, if not all, of the government currencies. Can government be another of the institutions or of the players that would be creating their coins? Yes. Are they going to be as efficient as McDonald's and Sears and Dell and Microsoft and the University of Oxford against Cambridge? Which one is better? Let them compete on this free market currency. And therefore, the question of it is good or not, it depends towards whom. And all of it, whereas it is the inflation rates, the interest rates, the volatility, all of these macroeconomic factors are secondary. Monero is a technology that uses sealed address, ring signatures, and ring confidential transactions. There's other ones like Zcash that uses what is called zero knowledge proof. And these methods allows us to create alternative civilizations and alternative economic systems that works in parallel outside of the nation state, the 194 or the 200 governments that we have across the world. And the importance of this is that it creates, and the problem that Julian is describing, it is solved through what we call selective transparency. Meaning there are some organizations, Adam or Julian, or the people that are listening to us, that might want to be part or share their data, the data consumption of economic financial transactions with certain ideology like climate change or feminism. They might want to be part of an industry like health and diet and sharing their information with them, or to a religious community within the church, the synagogue, or the mosque, where they need extreme transparency only for their members. So the Jews will not be sharing information with the Christians and they will not with the Muslims, etc. This level of selectivity is what private cryptocurrency allows us to have. Should we be worrying about what is Christine Lagarde, what is the European Union, United Nations? I work with those guys all day. I lecture with them, with the European Union, with the United Nations. I was living in Kenya because my ex-girlfriend works in United Nations. They're worthless. They're useless. They cannot create absolutely anything that is not involving force, violence, and stupidity. So us as tech developers, me as a member of the industry, I'm very passionate about these ideas. I will outdate them. We will kill them by being more efficient and more transparent and more beneficial towards humanity. That is the essence of cryptocurrencies. And using this ideology of the cypherpunks, crypto anarchists, and Satoshi Nakamoto, we will provide a market of governance where you, that guy, this guy, everyone would be able to choose whatever is best for them.
I mean, the technological development sounds pretty fantastic, but you always have the early adopters who can adjust to these new technologies very quickly. The big question with cryptocurrencies, from my perspective, is how do you make them mainstream in the long term? And you have mentioned a number of different advantages and different technological advancements in this field, but it still reaches a very small amount for global society. And Julian mentioned volatility as part of the problem. And I would be curious to hear your thoughts, whether you think that this volatility of cryptocurrencies, even the biggest ones, if you look at the price of Ethereum or Bitcoin, it goes up and down quite drastically on a regular basis. Do you think that's just a short-term issue that arises because the technology is so new and it's only a handful of people using that? Or is this kind of volatility part of the system and we just have to get used to it, even if we want to make cryptocurrencies more mainstream in the next 5-10 years? Julio, sorry.
Julio, no, we have two Julios in the houses. And
yeah, Julio and Julian, exactly. So Julio.
The question of mass adoption will lead towards the people being aware that they can use a better product that is more fascinating and that is more revolutionary than the current thing. Important thing is understand this within what we call Web3 or Industry 4.0. meaning there are concepts of singularity, of immortalism, or biomedical technologies, of quantum mechanics and technologies, of artificial intelligence, of decentralized autonomous organization, of the metaverse that Facebook is promoting at the moment. All of these technologies are looking into a very futuristic scenario where questions like private property or interest rates or volatility will not even be as important or will not be the subject of discussions overall. So how do we increase these ideas is always by this very small group of biohackers, Bitcoiners, crypto anarchists, trading investors, market governance, singularians, startup societies, the transhumanists that believe in a very futuristic world and are working full time towards achieving it, regardless and despite of what we are having at the moment. A conversation within is volatility, could it actually be short term or long term? I think it's a question without an answer. The same way that when David Friedman wrote and established that you can have a society with privatized laws and enforcement and core systems in 1973, it's still hypothetical because no one has built them until now. And when Friedrich Hayek in 1976 wrote the denationalization of money, he was based actually on one of the papers that was analyzed by one of the students of Ludwig von Mises back in 1929, that he wrote or that they established that they should be able to create one system where they change electricity, energy, towards a currency. So the idea that we have to denationalize, demonopolize, defragmentize, decentralize, deterritorialize the whole systems of humanity in its economic, legal, political, and immigration ways has existed for at least 100 years. How are we going to use certain tools to fulfill that goal, that objective? And the objective is the elimination of human violence of one group of experts from United Nations, from the European government, from the European Parliament, and from the British government that believe that they can rule over an entire group of society. I want to give you one example that is called blockchain Ladino. Ladino is a language spoken by the Spanish Jews until their expulsion in 1492, and they went towards Istanbul, the Mediterranean, the Maghreb, and these places south of Europe. There is one of the professors of Oxford and NYU, Carlos Yebra, that is thinking about creating a startup called Blockchain Ladino. And that physical jurisdiction territory will have the idea of how do we create a physical society, the city of Sefarat, as the Jews have the city of Kiryas Joel for the Ashkenazis Yiddish speakers. They want to create a cultural intention community that would likely have its own currency. So according to a national plan, there shouldn't be a lot of subdivision. But according to us that believe in human potential and capacity and the protection of extincted and endangered languages like Ladino, ancient Jewish languages, we should be able to have our own community with our own laws, with our own economic system that feeds the values of the religious that many of us profess.
Could I just come in on a couple of points, just picking up? And first of all, two things I absolutely agree with Julio on. First is the fact that almost all innovation and creativity comes from the private sector, not the state. I mean, if the central banks and governments were running absolutely everything, we still would be pretty much in the dark ages. So strong point of agreement there. The second point is about competition, and I think that's the way that I approach the issue of central bank digital currencies. If central banks want to set up digital currencies, then I think that's absolutely fine. And what that means in practice is that individuals and companies will be able to hold accounts at the central bank and use those to make payments, which is another option available to them. What I'll be concerned about is if that were the only option available to them. And that's where you start to run into the problems of central banks using these to create more money. If only a small number of people have these accounts, then central banks can't really use them fairly to boost the money supply, because they'll only be boosting the money supply if people haven't hold the accounts there. Also, the surveillance point, I think it's no coincidence, it's rather worrying that China has been at the forefront of developing ideas for central bank digital currencies and the surveillance state and so on. I think there's little doubt that China would use these things. But if all that digital currencies are, digital euro or digital pound, is an alternative means of payment that might be safer, more efficient, cheaper in some way, than using existing payment systems, then that's fine. The problem is when it crowds out other payment mechanisms, including cash, by the way. There's an awful lot of people who are still effectively unbanked in the UK and across Europe. I'm thinking particularly of older people who find new technology, without wanting to sound patronising or stereotypical, difficult to deal with. And there is a risk that if these new currencies, digital currencies, crowd out cash and more familiar payment systems through a high street bank, then I think that could be a problem for people who are marginalised already by the advance of technology. But if all we're talking about is central banks using blockchain technology or other technologies to provide more secure payment systems in competition with private sector alternatives, then I think it's difficult to object to that.
Both of you seem to be pretty optimistic when it comes to technological competition. So it's rather a good thing that some of these cryptocurrencies are spreading. But I would like to hear a bit of a prediction from both of you. So at the moment, very few people own any kind of crypto assets. If we're talking about making cryptocurrencies mainstream, then at least half the population should be using it or at least owning it. Julio, what's your prediction? When do you think the most popular cryptocurrency is going to reach a popularity that means at least 50% of the British society owns some sort of cryptocurrency? What's the year, based on your opinion?
It's a question without an answer. But where are the efforts of us technologies heading to? Prospera, Liberland, Acoin, Seasteads, Neom, the Free State Project, Blockchain LLC. Most of the very hard tech entrepreneurs, the grandson of Milton Friedman, Patrick Friedman, Peter Thiel, Joe Londesdale, Balaji, Nabal, we're all thinking about using the same method where you explain cryptocurrency is the economic out of 4 factors. The economic with cryptocurrency, the smart contracts in the legal sense, the centralized autonomous organizations, DAOs within the governance, and Bitcoin cities or blockchain cities with their own urbanization and immigration policies through blockchain cities. How are we going to build that? That is the difference between ideology and production. We can talk about all day and all night if this or that and tan. What are we actually producing? How many developers do we have? What's the level of investment? Do people know how to invest? Do they have Nutmeg? Do people know about biotechnology? Do they have an Aura Ring? Do people know about how to coding? Do they do Python and JavaScript? So those are the skills that are necessary for our audience to get. It is not about learning. The ideology, the morality is important, but the production is the real thing.
So no prediction when your futuristic vision might arrive.
Well, is that a question that can be realistically answered? Because I have my idea, Julian has, and everyone. I made one video. I have a TV program, has 1 million views. It's called Disruptive Technologies. It's the most popular in Latin America and in Spanish language. I created one sector where I gave one prediction. I gave like 50 prediction on the same program. I established that by the end of the year 2021, price of Bitcoin is going to be 100,000, then 120, 150, 135, 50, 21, 35, etc. And I record it all to prove society and to prove people that you can say whatever you want. All kind of useless prediction that you have because there's no accountability on any kind of system. So if anyone wants to hear saying one, good luck, because they'll likely be contradicting each other next year.
Julian, do you agree with Julio? Is it impossible to make a prediction by when cryptocurrencies might become mainstream?
I do. I'll give a more detailed answer though. I mean, first of all, I'll distinguish between the crypto as a currency and crypto as an asset. I think crypto as an asset, you compare it to something like gold. So not that many people have a direct holding of gold in their portfolio, but it plays a part as an inflation hedge and so on. And maybe crypto as an asset will sort of fulfill the same sort of function that gold has done in the past, or as a competitor to gold. Crypto as a currency, though, if we're talking about the technology, then I think that will gradually become more mainstream. And arguably, though, that's not really a game changer. That's the direction of travel for decades. I mean, very little of the money that we spend is actually physical cash now. Most of it is electronic in some form or another. And that's almost been accelerated by the pandemic as well. So I think the idea of using some form of electronic cash is now being widely accepted. In future, that might be pound sterling or euro. It might be a crypto, but increasingly we'll be looking using electronic money rather than cash, and crypto or the technology behind it will be an essential part of that. So that I think is almost happening already, but that clearly will be the direction of travel over the next several years and decades as well.
Great. Julian, thank you so much for your insights. I've really enjoyed listening to all your opinions and different perspectives, and I hope so did our audience. So thank you very much for joining the debate. If anyone in the audience has strong opinions on this issue, then please make sure to follow IE London on Twitter and vote in our Twitter poll. If you want to follow more of these markets and morality debates in the future, make sure to hit the subscribe button just below this video. And a special thanks to all of our donors, without whom our work at the IE would not be possible. If you wish to become one of them, please do consider subscribing to our IE Patreon account, where you can receive some of the exclusive content and have a sneak peek into some of the behind the scenes discussions as well. So thanks a lot for joining us, and I hope to see you in 2 weeks' time again.
Voila. Thank you very much again. Thank you.
Thanks again. Cheers.